Jeremy Dalley is a physician assistant with Trip Family Medicine in Twin Falls, and he's joining us this morning for our Better Health segment. Bill Colley with you as well. It's 8:34, and if you've got a comment or question for the medical professional, keep in mind you can reach us at 736-0300. We're at 70. I'm not really going to get anywhere near as hot as it was yesterday. We're talking stress today, although not heat stress, but stress in general. I guess they're both forms of stress, but the just in a much more general sense about stress. Jeremy, welcome back. First of all,
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks, Bill.
I was going to say we all know at least a little bit about stress because I don't care who you are. Now there are Type A personalities, Type B personalities, as they're called.
Sure.
My dad was a tremendous stressor. He seemed to be stressing about everything. Me, not so much. My mother never seemed to stress about anything. I'm sort of in the middle. But but I've seen some people out there. That, in fact, do you remember the show The Wonder Years, where the father was
I do.
always stressed,
Always.
and when the show ended, Kevin is narrating what happened in their lives and mentions his dad died, and relatively young because of the stress he was always under, and that was a bit of a bittersweet ending to that program. But there are people we know like that are so keyed up that uh, you just want to tell them you need to calm down or else.
Right. And that's a common response from people, settle down. Just stop worrying about it. And it's easier said than done. Some people like yourself or like your mom you said are great at just letting things go. No, it's not a big deal. And some people they can't let things go. Or it could be an environmental situation where they're stuck somewhere and they feel like they can't get out and they feel like they're trapped. And so there's a lot of things that contribute to stress. And you know, some people they find ways to get themselves into stressful situations all the time. It doesn't matter who they or where they go or what they're doing. That person will be in a stressful situation.
I wonder though, is it genetic or is it cultural? Because my dad used to joke, calling my grandparents on my mother's side of the family Ma and Pa Kettle, because they weren't really interested in material things. They lived. I'm saying frugally, but they didn't seem to think they were living frugally, and they were just very relaxed about everything. And my mother obviously grew up in that atmosphere, and she adopted that same sort of approach to life, where she didn't sweat a lot of things, and I've always wondered, was it somehow genetic, or was it just a culture that they all came up in?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think some people, despite their family situation, they could have Ma and Pa Kettle and end up being a type A, very driven, stressed out individual, and the opposite could be true. So I think it's really a combination of things. Some people they tend to avoid stress because their parents were always stressed about this or that, or they worried about money and every little thing that was going on, and they don't want to be like that. So they try real hard to avoid stressful situations, and the decisions they make keep them out of those situations. Um, and I think the big question is stress is all stress bad? Is some stress good? And and the answer is there is some good stress. And I think you know that. I mean, anyone that's done some college education and the more college education that you have and it's the same in the work environment. I think you get a deadline coming up, and you tend to get those a lot more in college.
Hmm.
You always have a test coming up, and there's a little bit of stress that's associated with studying and preparing for an exam and trying to get the grades that you want to get to where you need to be. And some of that is good. It drives us. It drives us to achieve, and it drives us to basically improve ourselves or just take care of a problem.
Exercise is a good stress for the most part.
Yeah, yeah, and that's one thing that I wanted to touch on today was, and we'll talk more about that later. Is exercise can be one of the best treatments for stress. So it is a form of physiological stress. You stress the muscles and the heart and the lungs, the blood vessels, all of the things in the body that are used when you're exercising, but in a good way. In a good way.
Now, when we talk about that too, it also helps you reduce maybe a lot of that mental stress you'd be under.
Definitely. Yeah, and a lot of that is based on Well, what is happening in your body when you're exercising besides that physiological stress that we talked about? Well, the brain is affected by exercise really dramatically, actually. So one of the things that we see with exercise, and this is why exercise is actually addicting to a lot of people. Your brain releases their feel good endorphins, neurotransmitters, whatever you want to call them, things like dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine. These feel good neurotransmitters that basically help you to feel less stressed, less anxious, less depressed. And it's amazing people who the only thing in their life that they change is exercise tend to feel more healthy.
Hmm.
I mean, they could be in the same stressful situation, same stressful job, same financial situation, but once they make that change and they start being physically active, well, then we see things improve.
We have music here. It's the theme for one of the greatest stressors in movie history. We've got more coming up with Jeremy Dalley from Trip Family Medicine. It's 69. Bill Colley with you as well this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The segment is called Better Health with Trip Family Medicine. Jeremy Dalley is our studio guest. He's joining us from Trip Family Medicine this morning. We're talking about stress and its impact on your health. And if you've got a question or comment, perhaps you've got some in your life, Jeremy can point you in the right direction and give you some ideas on how you can either solve it or control it. And maybe that's a better way to put it because you don't necessarily want to get rid of all of it, is what he was pointing out in the last segment of the program. It's 8:42. Bill Colley with you as well this morning on Better Health. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Uh, Jeremy, for people who'd like to get in touch with the office, there's a number of ways to do that.
Certainly. We'd love to hear from you. You can give us a call at 933-4400. If you want to learn more about our clinic, visit us on our website at tripfamilymedicine.com, or you can kind of keep in touch with what we're doing in the community. And we have a couple of different events coming up, including a fifth year anniversary that's going to be at the city pool. So I encourage you to get onto Facebook and look at that, or our website, if you're not on social media, and just kind of see what we're doing and come and get to know us and see what we're about. And we'd love to meet you.
I wanted to point out this discussion about stress. We had an assistant football coach in high school named Mr. Ortiz, and when I used to have to run in practice, he sometimes would run with me, and he would literally run beside me, but be yelling at me the whole time. Pick it up, pick it up, pick it up. In other words, to increase my speed, or and it was his way, and that's stress you get in your life. But I'll never forget, he was also our Spanish teacher, and one day he was upset with somebody in class, and he stopped and he said, "You're not worth getting high blood pressure over." So he knew when to apply a little stress, but he also was looking to control his own.
That's right. Well, and that's a good thing. A lot of people, they don't know when to quit. And I do want to point out that a lot of my comments today, a lot of the research that I've done today was based on an article from the American Psychological Association on understanding chronic stress. So I always like to point out if I'm getting my references from somewhere and give credit where credit is due. Um, so a lot of the comments are from there. A lot of the research that I did. One of the things that I really wanted to share, I was kind of thinking back on times in my life when I've had some chronic stress, and school is one that I thought of, and one of the experiences that I had the opportunity to work in a really busy emergency room in El Paso, Texas, just right near the U.S. border, and it was certainly an interesting place to work for a number of reasons. Um, but one of them was it was extremely busy, and the acuity, the amount of people that were just really sick was incredible. And I'd come over from a family medicine kind of outpatient clinics, and pretty laid back and not too driven, and we were busy, but the difference was just it was stark. And oh,
We have a caller with us.
okay.
We'll get to our caller and then pick up the Jeremy story as well. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air at 8:44. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. just wondered if he might have a cure for folks listening to Top Story on KLIX. You know, we get to stressing over.
That's a good point to be made. There's a lot going on in the world right now that people, you think about that. I was watching a show the other day about people who grew up in the 50s when they always were worried about the bomb, for instance, and how it impacted an entire generation. And now we're surrounded in a world where you've got so many things churning, and how do you deal with that? Because you turn on the radio, you turn on the television, there it is, right in front of you.
Sure. Well, I'll actually reference one of my favorite books. It's Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. If you've never read that, it's a great read and a lot of really good pointers on overcoming kind of personal trials and being the best that you can be. One of the things that he talks about there is this concept of having a circle of influence and a circle of concern. Now, all of us have things that we worry about, and that's our circle of concern. But what can you do about it? Well, there's very little that we can do a lot about a lot. There's very little that we can do about a lot of the things that are happening today. I mean, there's a lot of stressors and a lot of kind of bothersome things happening in our world. And what can we do about it? Well, we can affect our local community. I mean, if we need to reach out and talk to our local senators and congressmen and whatever we need to do. I mean, those are things that we can do.
Hmm.
Other than that, then we can't worry about things beyond our control.
Focus on your family
Yeah,
otherwise,
right.
and
Focus on the things within your direct control, how you can act, how you can respond to situations. And, ultimately that's easier said than done, but there's only so much that we can do about those things. We can talk about them and, share our opinions and get a little bit keyed up, but we can't let it be a chronic stressor.
we have another caller with us. It's 847 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. A physician assistant, Jeremy Dalley, joining us this morning from Trip Family Medicine in Twin Falls. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air.
Well, as a 62-year-old female, I'm having some problems with the bottom number of my blood pressure, and I just went through a really frustrating about 5 visits to try to get some blood pressure medicine that wasn't giving me some adverse effects, and I'm kind of at a loss as to what to do. I started off with lisinopril, of course, and it had the HTC, and it gave me gout. And then I went to lisinopril by itself, and it dropped the blood pressure so far down that I was actually kind of dizzy. And then we went through several, versions of, devolumizing type, drugs, and they made me sick. So I don't know. Have you got some recommendations? I don't know what to do.
Oh yeah, that's a tough scenario. I mean, the first thing that I always try to recommend for patients when it comes to high blood pressure is working on whatever lifestyle modifications that you can make. Now, medication is a great way to treat high blood pressure, and sometimes, the frustrating part is we're left with medicine after making lifestyle changes because there's changes that happen in the kidneys and in the way that the brain regulates fluid. And so we're left with medication to treat those things. But, I think focusing on some of the things that you could change in your lifestyle, and certainly I don't know the specifics of what you're doing or what you've tried, but I always start with things like, well, are you monitoring your sodium intake? I mean, most of the recommendations say less than 2,000 milligrams of sodium a day is the recommendation for people with high blood pressure.
Okay.
Now, the other thing that I would say is, how active are you being? If you're not being physically active, then I think that.
Well, it became very high during the winter, and I had injured my foot, and I wasn't able to move around, and it just kept creeping higher and higher. It was getting into the 150 over 90 area, and
Mhm.
I had some chiropractors that took my blood pressure, and they said, "Oh, not good. And so, but I mean, I think the pain had a lot to do with it, and the fact that I wasn't able to move around.
Sure.
And then as I started the blood pressure medicine, I was on the lisinopril by itself probably the longest, and it was fine. I mean, it was it made me feel so much better. But as I became more active, that's when I noticed that it was dropping my blood pressure lower and lower, because the pain in my foot was going away. Well, as it turned out, it was also giving me one of the side effects, which was the dry
Dry
cough.
cough.
Yeah. And so that was one of the reasons we decided to change it. But now that I'm still active, but and the summer is fine, but I'm just having some problems with that bottom number. It seems to hang around in the 80s, and even if it's like this morning, it was 127 over 85, and then sometimes when it goes higher, it ends up in the 90s.
Sure.
And I try to take it, during different times of the day, but I just can't seem to get it down low enough. And I'm not sure if that's even something I should be worrying about.
Well, and that's what I will say. A few years ago, there was a recommendation put out. Um, it was called the JNC8 guidelines, and it's this joint national commission that makes recommendations on control of high blood pressure. And the recommendation that was made, and there's been some varying reports since then as to whether or not this is a good recommendation, is for individuals over 60 to not overtreat their blood pressure, basically to keep their blood pressure in a range that is going to prevent cardiovascular disease, prevent strokes and heart attacks, right? And that's important. But the concern that we have a lot of times is we overtreat blood pressure in individuals over 60, and we end up increasing risk for falls, which falls lead to hospitalizations. Hospitalizations lead to infections associated with hospitalizations, and ultimately, we see those individuals have decreased quality of life. And so the recommendation that was given was to keep blood pressure at less than 150 over 90. So certainly 130s over 85 fits within that recommendation. Now, like I said, I don't know your particular health history, and that's one thing that definitely should be addressed with your personal physician. But that's the recommendation that was given, and I'm not going to tell you not to worry about it because I think it's good to be conscientious of blood pressure, but um, take those recommendations and maybe think about those and see how you feel.
We want to thank her for the call. We're at 8:52. Jeremy Dalley from Trip Family Medicine in studio with us on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley as well. You were referencing El Paso in the emergency room. It's a little bit like, remember the old movie and TV show MASH?
Oh yeah,
The stress that they would undergo because of just the nature of the traumatic wounds that they were seeing when people would come in. I suspect that even working in a medical environment like that, it's bad enough that the people are suffering from this physical stress, the stress of that trauma, but you as a provider are going through that too.
yeah. There's definitely a lot of that. I mean, there'd be times in the emergency room where you'd have several patients that were just had so many comorbidities such as diabetes and kidney disease and multiple recent infections, and they were real sick, and you'd have several of those patients at a time, and you weren't the only one. There was, I mean, it was a large ER. I mean, we had, I think, 50 plus beds in the emergency room, which that's bigger than a lot of hospitals in this area. um, and we were in and out patients all day long, really sick patients, and the cumulative effect of that stress, that chronic stress on me was amazing to see. Some of the things that I experienced, and it caused me to change my environment, was I'd never really had severe anxiety, and I was getting anxiety on a regular basis. I experienced some weight gain, and a lot of that was based on my my stress eating, as we say. Basically my way to deal with the stress at that time was to eat more, and there we had all sorts of snacks and stuff that we had access to while we were there, and just kind of snacked as we could between patients, and over time that cumulative effect of the stress really affected my health, and I didn't feel well. And in my estimation, I felt like if I continued in this way, that my quality of life and uh, my life expectancy in general wasn't going to be as long. And so I felt like, oh, I need to make a change.
I've done that a couple of times. I worked in a factory setting at one point in my life, and near the end of that, I remember pulling into the parking lot for the night shift one time, or the overnight shift, and literally feeling in my stomach that I was sick. And then I worked at a radio station where doing what I'm doing today, but I had a bear of a boss, and it was just very taxing on me at home, and it took that with me everywhere. Switching jobs in both cases just made me feel a lot better.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the keys with chronic stress is recognizing and changing behavior that cause it. And sometimes it's beyond your circle of influence. I mean, you can't change your boss and you can't change that particular environment necessarily. Sometimes you can. And if you can, by all means change it. But sometimes the answer is, oh, you got to move on. You got to do something different.
I
Yeah.
uh, I lost a job one time where we got into a snit over really control of the newsroom I was running at the time. And I remember telling a friend, and he said, "Well, yeah, but in 3 months you're going to be much happier." And sure enough, 3 months later, I had more time with my daughter, had a less stressful job, wasn't making as much money, but I wasn't carrying all that baggage with me all the time, where I was always in that fight flight mode with the boss that I worked for.
Well, I think that's a great description, that fight or flight mode. And really what's happening, it's very physiologically similar to what's happening when, you're being chased by a Bengal tiger. Not that, any of us have, but that's one of the examples that we always used in school to describe how you would feel. And, even just thinking about that, I think it gets a little bit of the stress hormones rolling. And, an interesting thing is that a lot of studies that have been done on chronic stress have shown that people who have higher levels of cortisol, which is it's a hormone released, especially during stress, they tend to have higher deposition of fat on their body. So we gain more weight, we have a increased appetite, a desire to eat, all of those things that really negatively affect our health. And a lot of the research shows that individuals with chronic stress are at that develop depression and anxiety are at twice the risk for heart disease than people with those conditions. So it's a pretty amazing statistic.
We've got to wrap up today. For people who'd like to contact the office, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, get a hold of us at 933-4400. We're located across from the post office on Fillmore, or check us out on Facebook or our website at tripfamilymedicine.com. We'd love to meet you and hear from you.
I want to thank Jeremy Dalley for dropping in this morning. We've got news at 9 o'clock, just around the corner here from Fox. It's 71. Not going to be quite as hot as it was yesterday. I do want to point out as well, we'll be joined in the next hour by Lieutenant Governor Brad Little. He's just returned from a conference where he was working to attract new businesses to Idaho, and he'll have some details about all of that on the way on Top Story.